Nurses are supposed to be the lifeline, the ones we trust in our most vulnerable moments. But when someone with a stethoscope and a badge of compassion uses their access to harm, the betrayal shakes entire communities to their core. Today, we're exploring America's most shocking cases of nurses and nurse aides sentenced to life in prison. These aren't stories from movies or horror novels. They happened in real hospitals and nursing homes where the people meant to save lives became predators. We'll take you from the crime scenes to the courtrooms, through the chilling details and the lasting scars left on families and entire medical systems. Brace yourself. These are the true stories of the most evil nurses ever locked away for life. Genene Jones. Genene Jones was trusted with the most fragile lives, infants in the pediatric intensive care unit of San Antonio's Bezoar County Hospital. But behind her reassuring smile hid a dark compulsion. Throughout the late 1970s and early 1980s, an alarming number of babies under Jones's care suddenly went into cardiac arrest. Colleagues whispered, but no one could believe a nurse would harm children until the evidence became impossible to ignore. Investigators discovered Jones had been injecting infants with deadly doses of drugs like succinylcholine and heparin, deliberately causing crises so she could rush to save them. But for too many, help came too late. One victim, 15-month-old Chelsea McClellan, was a healthy toddler until she met Jones. The child's sudden, unexplained death finally forced the hospital to act. Jones was tried and convicted for Chelsea's murder in 1984 and the attempted murder of another baby. The trial revealed a pattern of fatal accidents, and prosecutors labeled her a serial killer in a nurse's uniform. Though suspected of up to 60 infant deaths, Jones was convicted on just 2 counts, but sentenced to 99 years and an additional 60 years, ensuring she would die in prison. Her lack of remorse and the hospital's failure to act sooner led to national outrage and changes in Texas law, mandating hospitals to report suspicious deaths. Today, Genene Jones is a chilling reminder that even the most trusted hands can harbor pure evil. Charles Cullen. Charles Cullen seemed like an ordinary nurse, quiet, reliable, and eager to help. But beneath that calm exterior, Cullen became the deadliest nurse in American history. Over a 16-year career, working in hospitals across New Jersey and Pennsylvania, Cullen murdered at least 40 patients, though the true count could be in the hundreds. His weapon: overdoses of insulin, digoxin, and heart medications slipped into IV bags or injected directly into unsuspecting patients. Some were already gravely ill, but others were on the road to recovery when their lives ended without warning. The horror began to unravel when co-workers noticed an alarming pattern of unexpected deaths, always during Cullen's shifts. As investigations deepened, Cullen's own admission sent shockwaves through the medical world. He claimed he was ending suffering, but many victims weren't terminal. Prosecutors said it was about control and power. In 2003, he was finally arrested and confessed to dozens of murders. His trial was a media sensation. Relatives of the dead packed the courtroom, desperate for answers. Cullen was sentenced to 11 consecutive life terms with no chance of parole. The case exposed massive gaps in hospital oversight. Cullen had been quietly dismissed from multiple jobs, and references were rarely checked. Hospitals wanted to avoid scandal, so they let him slip away, leaving devastation in his wake. Charles Cullen's legacy is a permanent scar on American nursing, a story retold as a warning about the danger of silence and misplaced trust. Kristen Gilbert. Kristen Gilbert's smile reassured patients at the Veterans Affairs Medical Center in Northampton, Massachusetts. But between 1995 and 1996, the number of code blues, medical emergencies, skyrocketed on her shifts. Patients who seemed stable would suddenly crash, and Gilbert was always the first to respond, relishing the chaos. Behind the scenes, suspicions grew as the death toll mounted. Gilbert's colleagues noticed she paid extra attention to older male patients, men who soon suffered fatal cardiac arrests. It wasn't long before the truth surfaced. Gilbert had been injecting patients with massive doses of epinephrine, triggering heart attacks so she could play the hero. She murdered at least 4 veterans and attempted to kill several others. Prosecutors argued she was driven by a twisted desire for attention and to impress a hospital security guard with whom she was having an affair. The trial was filled with jaw-dropping details. Co-workers testified about the inexplicable death spikes and Gilbert's bizarre behavior, including anonymous threats and bomb scares to distract investigators. Found guilty in 2001, Kristen Gilbert was sentenced to life in prison without parole. For the families of her victims, the wounds never healed. Many spoke in court about the betrayal they felt, not just from Gilbert, but from a system that let her crimes go undetected for months. Her case became a national scandal, leading to stricter controls on medication and patient monitoring. Kristen Gilbert remains one of America's most chilling reminders that sometimes the danger comes from within the very walls meant to protect us. Kimberly Sians. Kimberly Sians was supposed to help patients survive their toughest days. But in 2008, the DaVita Dialysis Center in Lufkin, Texas, became a place of terror and confusion. Sians, a licensed nurse, turned a treatment meant to save lives into a silent execution. Over just a few months, an unusual number of patients suffered cardiac arrests during their dialysis sessions. Many never left the clinic alive. The one thing they all had in common: Sians was their nurse. The horror unraveled when 2 patients witnessed Sians drawing bleach into a syringe and injecting it directly into the lines connected to patients' bodies. They reported her to a supervisor, who launched an internal investigation and alerted police. As detectives dug deeper, they found a pattern: 19 deaths during Sians's 9-month tenure and bleach residue in the equipment. Sians, who was struggling with job stress and a history of disciplinary problems, denied everything. She insisted she was cleaning equipment, not harming patients, and blamed the deaths on clinic mismanagement. But her story fell apart under scrutiny. Internet searches found on her computer bleach poisoning. Can bleach be detected in dialysis? Proved damning. In court, survivors and families described the panic, loss, and disbelief that swept the clinic. The jury convicted Sians of 5 counts of murder and 5 counts of aggravated assault. She was sentenced to life without parole, forever remembered as the nurse who brought fear and death to those seeking care. Kimberly Sians's crimes shook the entire medical community, a stark warning of what happens when trust is broken at the hands of a caregiver. Richard Angelo. Richard Angelo was the kind of nurse every hospital wants: calm under pressure, eager to help, and a stickler for procedures. But in the late 1980s, the ICU at Good Samaritan Hospital in Long Island, New York, turned deadly. Angelo, a registered nurse, had a dark obsession. He injected at least 35 patients with lethal doses of muscle relaxants, then would try to revive them in front of his colleagues. His motive? He wanted to be seen as a hero, the one who saved lives when disaster struck. Patients under Angelo's care, many of them elderly or already vulnerable, began dying unexpectedly. Death rates spiked when he was on shift. Suspicion grew among staff, and hospital administrators began an internal probe. The final piece fell into place when one patient, aware of what was happening, survived and told investigators about the odd taste and sensation after Angelo's injection. In his trial, prosecutors called him a self-made hero and presented evidence of his elaborate planning and deception. Angelo claimed he only wanted to be respected, not to kill, but his confessions and the overwhelming evidence left the jury horrified. Families of the victims filled the courtroom, seeking answers for their sudden losses. Richard Angelo was convicted of second-degree murder and assault, receiving a sentence of 61 years to life. His case stands as a grim reminder of the psychological dangers lurking in positions of medical power and the tragedy that follows when one person's ego overrides their duty to protect life. Orville Lynn Majors. Orville Lynn Majors was a trusted nurse in the quiet Vermilion County Hospital in Clinton, Indiana, a rural facility serving elderly patients in the 1990s. But during Majors' shifts, patients kept dying at an astonishing rate. From 1993 to 1995, the mortality rate in the hospital's ICU soared. Majors, a popular and confident nurse, was always there when patients collapsed, often the last person to see them alive. Suspicions mounted when coworkers noticed a bizarre pattern. Deaths spiked whenever Majors was on duty and declined when he was away. The hospital launched a review, and soon state investigators were called in. Autopsies revealed that at least 6 patients had been injected with lethal doses of potassium chloride and epinephrine, drugs that stopped their hearts almost instantly. The trial was a media sensation. Prosecutors detailed how Majors targeted the most vulnerable, often choosing those he found difficult or annoying. Some staff testified that Majors expressed open contempt for elderly patients, even joking about how the only good patient is a dead patient. The jury convicted him of 6 murders, though he was suspected in as many as 100 deaths. Majors was sentenced to 360 years in prison, one of the longest terms ever handed down to a healthcare worker in the U.S. His crimes shattered the small Indiana town and became a case study in medical oversight failures. Orville Lynn Majors' reign of terror remains one of the darkest chapters in American nursing history, a warning of how a caregiver's power can be twisted into unimaginable harm. Gwendolyn Graham and Kathy Wood. The Alpine Manor Nursing Home in Grand Rapids, Michigan, should have been a place of safety and comfort for its elderly residents. But in the late 1980s, 2 employees, registered nurse Gwendolyn Graham and her lover, Kathy Wood, a nurse's aide, turned it into a house of horrors. Over a period of months, a string of elderly women died unexpectedly, all under the watch of Graham and Wood. The crimes went undetected for years, masked as natural causes, until Wood confessed to a new boyfriend and the truth finally came out. Graham and Wood developed an intense, secretive romance that fueled their deadly game. According to Wood, the pair suffocated at least 5 elderly female patients for sexual excitement, choosing their victims almost at random. Sometimes they would draw a symbol on the victim's chart to commemorate the act. The duo's method was chillingly simple. A pillow pressed gently over a frail face, an act invisible to the untrained eye. For a long time, no one suspected a thing. The courtroom was riveted by Wood's testimony. She turned state's evidence in exchange for a lesser sentence, detailing the pair's so-called murder list. Families of the victims, many of whom never believed their loved ones had died naturally, were devastated. Gwendolyn Graham was convicted of 5 murders and sentenced to life without parole. Kathy Wood received a 20 to 40-year sentence for her role as an accomplice and was paroled in 2020. This case remains one of the most shocking examples of abuse of trust in long-term care and a haunting reminder of how evil can flourish behind closed doors. Donna Perry. Donna Perry, formerly known as Douglas Perry, worked as a nurse's aide in Spokane, Washington, but hid a much darker secret. In the early 1990s, Perry was responsible for the murders of at least 3 women, all sex workers whose bodies were found along the Spokane River. The killings went unsolved for decades, until advances in DNA technology and a renewed investigation finally pointed to Perry, by then living as a woman after gender transition surgery. Perry's victims, Yolanda Sapp, Nikki Lowe, and Catherine Brisboe, were all young women trying to survive on the margins of society. Their deaths had long been considered just another statistic in a rough part of town, but the details told a more sinister story. Each woman was shot and discarded in remote locations. At trial, prosecutors argued that Perry transitioned in part to evade detection, but the evidence, especially DNA and ballistic matches, was impossible to refute. During the trial, Perry claimed she was no longer the same person as the killer, a defense that left jurors unmoved. The courtroom heard from victims' families who had waited years for justice. In 2017, Donna Perry was convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to life without parole. The case made national headlines for its bizarre twists and raised profound questions about identity, accountability, and the challenges of cold case investigations. For the victims' families, the verdict finally brought some measure of closure after decades of grief and unanswered questions. Efren Saldivar. While not a registered nurse, Efren Saldivar's crimes belong among the most chilling medical murders in U.S. history, and his job as a respiratory therapist placed him in the same position of trust as any nurse. Working at Glendale Adventist Medical Center in California during the 1980s and 1990s, Saldivar secretly ended the lives of elderly and terminally ill patients by injecting them with muscle relaxants like Pavilon and succinylcholine. He later confessed to killing as many as 50 people, though investigators suspect the real number could be much higher. Saldivar's crimes went undetected for years. He claimed he was putting suffering patients out of their misery, but the victims' families and prosecutors saw it differently. These were murders committed by a man who played God with vulnerable lives. The hospital eventually noticed a suspicious spike in deaths when Saldivar was on shift, triggering an internal probe and a call to law enforcement. The investigation ramped up in 1998 when Saldivar admitted to police that he'd killed patients for years. However, without concrete physical evidence in most cases, prosecutors focused on a handful where the drugs could still be detected in exhumed bodies. In 2002, Saldivar pleaded guilty to 6 counts of murder and was sentenced to 6 consecutive life terms. For families who trusted the hospital with their loved ones, Saldivar's betrayal was almost unimaginable. His case stands as a warning about the dangers of unchecked power in the healthcare system and the tragic cost of lives lost to one man's twisted sense of mercy. Donald Harvey. Donald Harvey wasn't a registered nurse, but his role as a hospital orderly gave him access to some of the most vulnerable patients in Ohio and Kentucky. Between 1970 and 1987, Harvey killed at least 37 people, possibly more than 80, by poisoning, suffocation, and other methods in multiple hospitals. His victims were mostly elderly or critically ill patients, but some were healthier, targeted simply because they annoyed him or because he could get away with it. Harvey's favorite tools were cyanide, arsenic, and rat poison, often slipped into food, IVs, or feeding tubes. At first, staff believed the deaths were due to natural causes, but as suspicions grew and patterns emerged, Harvey's shocking double life came to light. The case broke open when a medical examiner detected cyanide during a routine autopsy. Police searched Harvey's home and found a stockpile of toxic substances. During interrogation, Harvey confessed with chilling calm, describing himself as an angel of death who put suffering patients out of their misery, but also admitting he sometimes killed for convenience or out of frustration. His trial was a media spectacle, with victims' families demanding answers. Harvey eventually pleaded guilty to 37 counts of murder, receiving multiple life sentences. The case led to sweeping changes in hospital oversight and background checks, as administrators faced hard questions about how such a killer went undetected for so long. Donald Harvey died in prison in 2017 after being attacked by another inmate, closing the book on one of America's most prolific healthcare killers, Kathy Wood. While Kathy Wood was technically a nurse's aide, her name is inseparable from the infamous Alpine Manor murders in Michigan. As the lover and accomplice of registered nurse Gwendolyn Graham, Wood was the driving force behind the plot to kill elderly female patients in the late 1980s. The two women formed a deadly pact, suffocating residents with pillows for their own twisted thrill, marking off each murder as if it were a game. While Graham carried out the actual killings, Wood manipulated and encouraged her at every turn. After the murders, Wood could not keep her dark secrets. She eventually confessed her role to a new boyfriend who went to the police. Investigators were shocked by her detailed descriptions and the casual way she described each killing. In court, Wood's testimony helped convict Graham, but also painted herself as a willing participant, not just a bystander. The families of the victims were left reeling from the betrayal by two women they had trusted to provide care and comfort. Wood was sentenced to 20 to 40 years in prison, while Graham received life without parole. Wood was paroled in 2020, a controversial decision that angered many, including relatives of the victims who believed she had not served enough time for her role in the deaths. The case stands as a chilling example of how manipulation and malice can infect even those expected to show the greatest compassion. Willie Melvin Cooper. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, the quiet halls of a Georgia nursing home became the backdrop for one of the state's most disturbing crime sprees, all at the hands of nurse's aide Willie Melvin Cooper. On the surface, Cooper was a mild-mannered caregiver, moving from room to room with practiced efficiency. But beneath that calm exterior lurked the darkness no one suspected. Cooper targeted the most vulnerable residents, elderly women, some suffering from dementia, others bedridden and unable to speak up. Over the course of his employment, at least 4 women died under suspicious circumstances. Their deaths were initially written off as natural given their frailty. It wasn't until staff noticed a pattern, healthy residents dying suddenly, often on Cooper's shift, that alarm bells began to ring. The families, trusting their loved ones were in good hands, were devastated when autopsies revealed evidence of suffocation and strangulation. Confronted with mounting evidence, Cooper confessed to the murders, showing little remorse and offering no clear motive. Prosecutors argued that Cooper was driven by a twisted desire for control, preying on those least able to defend themselves. The trial was a shock to the local community and the wider world of elder care. Families wept as they learned the truth, and Cooper's chilling calm in the courtroom left an unforgettable mark. Sentenced to life in prison, Willie Melvin Cooper remains a stark warning that evil can sometimes wear a caregiver's smile. His case led to tougher oversight and background checks in nursing homes, but for many, the scars of betrayal still linger. These stories reveal a chilling reality. Sometimes the greatest danger comes from those we trust most. Each of these nurses turned their caregiving role into something monstrous, leaving families shattered and hospitals changed forever. Their crimes forced tough questions and new safeguards, but for victims' loved ones, the scars are lasting. The legacy of these angels of death is a stark reminder. Vigilance and accountability are essential in healthcare. If these cases shocked you or made you think, share your thoughts below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more true crime stories that uncover the dark side of trust.